Fantasy playoffs are here. Who are some guys that we could potentially be benching? Pete, Jayden Reed, 0 fantasy points in week 13. This was the Thursday game, but we didn't forget about it. Just 8 catches in the last 4 games. Is he someone that you might consider benching?
Yeah, I think he has to be. It breaks my heart, too. I was so excited about Jayden Reed coming into this year. They open up the season there in Brazil, and he has this monster game, and you're like, oh, wow, it is happening. I still think he's, a Debo Samuel level talent on the Packers. And then you go look at his usage in week 14, and I'm watching that game. I'm like, what's going on? Is he in the doghouse? Did he pull a Jahmyr Gibbs and leak their plays? And now Matt LaFleur doesn't want to trust him. I don't know what is going on here. We knew this would be a rotation, right? They have lots of guys they like. Romeo Doubs, though, not playing. And to me, that was the weird thing. All right, Romeo Doubs is in. It's a rotation, yada, yada. You clear the runway with no Romeo Doubs. And it's like, how is Jayden Reed not a full-time player? I don't know if, Matthew, if you saw anything on this, if you have any answers here, I'm legitimately perplexed by what's going on here.
I am too. And I would say not just Jayden Reed, but any of them. Honestly, like when I was doing my show earlier today for Fantasy Football Happy Hour, we were talking about a waiver wire, and one of my producers put Dontavian Wicks on the list because Dobbs is likely going to be out. And I said, like, listen, just so you know, this is my producer putting on here. I don't agree with this. I wouldn't pick up Dontavian Wicks. I wouldn't start Dontavian Wicks. I don't want any part of the Packers passing attack because it's just so inconsistent. It's week to week. I think the answer is that they found real success running the ball. Josh Jacobs looks great. They're playing good defense, so they're not getting to shootouts. And so there's every possibility that Jayden Reed has 2 touchdowns this week. Like but it's so volatile, and it just, regardless of whether Dobbs is out, like whether it's Wicks, I mean, Dobbs was out last week and Reed does nothing. Right. And so I know Wicks got a lot of looks last week, but you could easily see Reed get a bunch of looks this week and nothing for Wicks. I just say, and Christian Watson, I want no part of the Packers passing attack. I think other than Tucker Kraft, I do think you can start Tucker Kraft given the level of production at tight end. I think Jordan Love is a sort of between the QB1, QB2, like he's kind of on that fringe. And Josh Jacobs has been awesome. But other than that, too much volatility, too much randomness isn't exactly the right word, but variance, I should say. Too much variance in where the pass distribution goes on the Green Bay Packers right now.
Yeah, definitely inconsistent there, especially with Jayden Reed. So consider sending him to your bench. Matthew, another name that we have to consider sending to the bench, or maybe people have just benched him for the last few weeks, but it is Debo Samuel. 85 receiving yards in the last 4 games combined. Are you benching him for the playoffs?
Maybe. I think you have to strongly consider it. I mean, look, this entire season, Debo Samuel has 2 end zone targets. 2. And none in the last 5 games. Over the last 4 weeks, Debo Samuel is wide receiver 88 on a points per game basis. Not a typo. You didn't mishear me. Wide receiver 88. He's CeeDee Lamb. In terms of, CeeDee Lamb is 8, right? That's his jersey number. That's what he is production-wise, Debo Samuel, of the last 4 weeks. He's averaging 4.7 points per game. He's been under 7 fantasy points in 4 straight. Now, the only caveat to this is, so yes, I think normally you'd look at those numbers, you're like, I want no part of this. The only caveat I would say is that I don't know if you guys saw this, but again, we've talked about sort of the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We saw it with DeAndre Hopkins, earlier. I mentioned that we've seen it with AJ Brown. I think you'll see it with AJ Brown this week. So we've seen it before, and it works, right? And so I think you'll see it potentially this week with Debo Samuel, because Debo Samuel put out a social post where he said basically, I'm not struggling, I'm not getting the ball. And then other people, community noted him and said, like, actually, you lead the team in drops. You're struggling. And so I do wonder if Kyle Shanahan, especially given the fact that they're on a short week, we just talked earlier in the show, Kendall, about how Isaac Guerendo is banged up and they might have to turn to, Patrick Taylor and Izzy Abanikanda and Tampa Bay Buccaneer legend Keyshawn Vaughn. Like, it's just a bunch of guys. I like Abanikanda a little bit, but I'm just saying, like, I do think there's a chance that you see Debo Samuel get 3, 4, 5 rushing attempts on Thursday because Guerendo may not play. And I do think there's a squeaky wheel narrative here with Debo. So if you need to start Debo, that's how I would talk myself into it. But honestly, if you want to play safe, and if you've gotten to the fantasy playoffs at this point, chances are you've done it without Debo Samuel because he's been bad over the last month. And so I'm not benching a surefire starter, somebody that's been productive over the last month for Debo. I'll put it that way. So, yeah, Debo goes to the bench unless you think, hey, maybe the squeaky wheel narrative does play out this week.
Man, can't believe that we're here talking about benching Debo Samuel for the playoffs, but that's, what we get over the last few weeks. Let's go over to DK Metcalf here, Pete. You've got 3 straight games under 10 fantasy points. Are you benching him for the fantasy playoffs?
I don't think I'm benching him unless I have a really strong option. And a strong option would be like, hey, you had picked up Juwan Jennings on waivers, and now Juwan Jennings has emerged as, one of the best wide receivers in football. Like, then I'm not going to hang on to the name brand value of DK Metcalf and be like, well, I took DK Metcalf in the 3rd round and Juwan Jennings. No, it's like, no, this is the new reality. That said, I still like this passing game. I think they are still willing to get in shootouts. The identity is still going to be around throwing the ball. And even though JSN has emerged as the 1A here, I still think there is room for Metcalf to have the big plays, right? It's kind of analogous to the AJ Brown stuff, right? The talent's still there, the big playability still there. He's just not seeing quite the volume that he did before, but even seeing here week 11 through 14, he has a bigger target share than JSN. So as long as the underlying utilization is there, I don't think we panic, and I would still feel good about starting DK Metcalf in my matchups.
I will say the Seahawks get the Packers this week, and then they go and face the Minnesota Vikings at home, and then they end with the Bears. So that's their next 3-game schedule for the Seahawks if you are thinking about benching DK Metcalf. Let's go over to another name here, Matthew, and talk about Marvin Harrison Jr., someone that was expensive in drafts this season. 6 of the last 9 games, as you can see on your screen, he's gone under 7 fantasy points. So are you benching him in the playoffs?
I'm probably not. Again, depends on what other options you have. But I will say that I think it's a good enough matchup with New England that I think that he's worth rolling the dice on. Look, he's had back-to-back games with multiple end zone targets. They're trying to get him the ball in scoring position. Like, they're looking for him. I think Kyler will play better as well against the Patriots. Over the last 4 weeks, New England allows the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers as well. He's had a 20% target share, Marvin Harrison Jr. has, in 10 of his 12 completed games this year. So, the volume has been there. The looks are there. He's getting high leverage looks. I know the production hasn't been there, but I feel like against New England, it will come together. So, I'm a little bit nervous. And he'll probably see some Christian Gonzalez, but I am reluctantly starting him in the fantasy playoffs if I don't have any better options.
All right, I like that. Here's hoping. We'll cross our fingers with Marvin Harrison Jr. and the Cardinals. Pete, the last name that we need to talk about, if you're going to bench or not, is going over to the Raiders. And we're talking and asking about Jacoby Myers and or Brock Bowers, just because, Aiden O'Connell does have a knee bone bruise, which I will say is a better outcome than a lot were expecting. He had the air cast on. He was carted off. So we don't know his status for this week. It could be Desmond Ridder. But let's just, if it is Desmond Ridder, how much do you downgrade these two for the playoffs?
A decent bit. Desmond Ridder, his game isn't those precision throws, getting the ball out quick. And that's really where Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers have been feasting this year. I mean, the one thing we can continue to hang our hat on is the fact that this entire passing offense revolves around these two. They've actually been slightly negatively correlated this year. It's like either a Jacoby Myers game or an insane Brock Bowers game. But I still think the targets are going to be there. We're going to take a hit on efficiency, right? There's going to be more drives that stall out, more punting, probably less red zone trips. So that hurts the ceiling. I'm cautiously optimistic, though, that these guys can still earn enough targets that specifically in PPR leagues, I would be okay, rolling them out. Way more so Brock Bowers, right? Because the barrier you have to clear to be a startable tight end is so much lower, and Brock Bowers has already shown us so much. Jacoby is going to be tough. He's in the conversation of these guys we've been talking about. But to me, I would almost honestly think about, am I a favorite or am I an underdog in my matchup? If I'm a big underdog, I'd rather swing for the fences with some of these other guys. But if I feel like, hey, I just give me my 8 or 9 points, like I don't want to risk a 0, I think Jacoby Myers can still give that for you.
And again, we don't know yet, as of taping this, if Aiden O'Connell is going to be the starting quarterback. So we were kind of talking as if it was going to be Desmond Ridder, but make sure you watch the injury reports for those updates.